This is Joan Conover. I want to thank our sponsor, NautiCAD. We are having a presentation, and NautiCAD allows us to do our live streaming and our SSU University. What we're going to cover today, there'll be sail buying decisions with Lee Duvall. We're talking about cruising sails function design, extending life of old sails. Jerry Latell, Evolution Sails. He has a loft in both Hampton and in Deltaville and a pickup point in Annapolis. This is the first in a series of 3 standalone sessions. The next ones will be April 21st and then the 28th. Please be aware that you can add questions and answer or ask questions in the question and answer box for Zoom. You can also chat. We will answer questions at the end of the webinar after Lee has done presenting and after Jerry. Although Jerry will be asking questions during, and he would very much like questions from you all. Now I'm going to stop the share now and turn it over to Lee, who's going to talk about sail buying decisions. Lee has gotten new sails. He's going to talk over what he did to get those sails, how he decided to do it. And Lee, if you would like to share your screen.
I thought I did. I'm going to have to go back and try it again.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I click share screen.
Mm-hmm. You have to highlight the presentation. And Lee is new to sharing.
Share.
There you go.
All right. Good evening. I'm Lee, and this is my partner, Danny, and we're going through a process of getting new sails for our home, my home. And in a prior life, I was privileged to work for 25 years in operations management for a small chemical company in North Carolina. As we grew, I was able to help coordinate much of the design build process for new plants in North Carolina, Texas, Puerto Rico, and Belgium. And as part of that, I was also part of the team that selected most of the operations equipment, and I worked with purchasing to write bid specs, do bid reviews, approve bids, and then conducting the factory acceptance testing and plant commissioning of that equipment. As part of that experience, we generally followed a standard set of bid steps. And since these sales are a pretty big purchase for us, I followed the same process. And the steps on that process, I'm going to put up on the screen and let you read them as we go through. It's generally 10-step process. And the most important part is getting to the end and enjoying them. So I'll start with the research, and I decided this needed to be, in my mind, settle our cruising sails different than racing or weekender sails. And the sources I used were articles out of a number of sailing magazines that I subscribed to, and also the internet through some boating groups that we belong to, and Google searches. And I finally decided to check out some YouTube videos and found some very really good YouTube videos done in the past year by a number of industry companies. And of course, I found out, yep, that cruising sails definitely are different than racing or weekenders, and catamaran cruising sails are more different than those. And Jerry will take over and give us much more information on that later. My second part of my research was I have a Leopard 42 that I bought 5 years ago, and I thought, as being a knowledgeable buyer to work with my sail loft, that I needed to know some of these factors. And one of the most important things was changes, because I found out that my rig is not a standard rig. My rig is cut down to be intercoastal waterway friendly. And as a result, the sail, the main sail, was cut up, which pretty significantly reduced the overall performance of the mainsail. And I figured out if the sailmaker needed to know this because most of the first quotes I got were based on the standard factory measurements of the boat. And the other part that I thought I needed to understand better was what improvements, if I had this opportunity, would I like to make? So things like reefing points. My current sail has got 2 reefing points. From cruising, talking to many cruising people, I was advised that 3 reefs are probably a lot better option on a cruising sail, especially if you're going blue water at some point in the future. Reefing method. I also have a very obsolete reefing method I found out. And I've always had problems with the battens and the slides, so I'd like to see if that could be improved. Other issues were the size, because the sail plan for my boat, I found out from the factory, is based on 110 jib, the performance features on it, but it's got actually has a 130% general on the boat. And I wanted to understand how that affected. And then some small things that have been challenges through the year, like trying to see your tails on the back side of the sail on a sunny day is almost impossible. Leech lines, I don't have on my catamaran. I can't get up to the back of the sail, so I can't adjust the leech line that's on the current sail, and a few things like that. The next part would be vendor or loft options. And you have your choice of local or US or international, big or small, and all of those have pros and cons, which Jerry will cover for us later. In my case, I preferred using a local loft for reasons that I think most everybody will understand. The next process I went through was I'd already gotten, when I bought the boat, because the sail that was put on was cut down because the main was cut down. And when I bought the boat, the mainsail had been split by the prior owner right in half. So I actually not only had a cut down rig, I had a used cut down second-hand sail that was on the boat. And when I bought it, my broker had gotten quotes from me from Max Sails and Ullman Sails. And I had never pulled the trigger on that because the sails that we had were only supposed to last about a year, and somehow they managed to make it almost 5 years. Other was I had a rigger who's been doing some jobs on my boat, and he asked if he could quote, and I'm a member of Power Squadron in North Carolina and had a boat that I sail on the Pamela Coast, so I knew Omar Sails out of Oriental. And then I decided to look at articles and just Sailmakers, all the lofts that I could find using Google Maps and other sources on the bay. And I also was aware of Dave Calvert, who's out of Marathon, Florida, because he was a member of the owners group that I belong to. And he is pretty widely known for making big racing, worldwide racing sails. So I was hoping that we might have some of his input. The next step is on the bids that I got back. I looked at Max Sails, and I created basically a grid of the price, materials, and features and warranty for each of these. Ullman Sails, competitive, but they were not competitive on price, but they had an excellent warranty. Trident Marine had the lowest price, but was lacking in other areas. And then Evolution, Latell Sailmakers, was competitive and had everything I wanted, but the warranty was a little bit in the same. The other sail makers that in the area that I considered are as this list. And all of these are good lofts. I didn't hear anything bad or negative about any of these. But I went ahead and started negotiating with 3 of the 4 sail makers that I had, and Latell was offering some very helpful features and stayed in touch with us, making sure that any concern we had was addressed, and offered to take us on a tour of his loft in Deltaville. So we considered soliciting more bids, but gave up after, decided it just wasn't necessary after we toured the Latell loft. And the next step we followed would be order placement. On February 19th, we toured the loft. talked to Jerry about terms and conditions, and then we decided to go ahead and place the order for a main and a 130 Genoa and pay the 50% down. And after we had gotten that far, I had heard from a lot of cruisers that a downwind sail is a absolutely wonderful addition to your sail suite. We do not have on the boat, it didn't come with a downwind sail. So I thought about that, and Jerry was kind enough to give us a quote on a 150 asymmetrical, but at this time the purchase is deferred. And then after looking at a lot of the videos from new companies on new sailboats, brand new sailboats from various manufacturers, so the one common thing I noticed on all of them is everybody has gone to putting all their lines in the cockpit. And I figured out that that actually was because they have gone to single line reefing, as I understand it. So I asked Jerry if it was possible to make that part of the main sail features, and I was advised it already was, not a problem. So I have also discussed with a local rigger what kind of changes have to be made, and if, most importantly, if they're feasible, and that's still under discussion. And then the last steps are delivery, install, testing, learning the features, and enjoying. And the delivery's in process. The sales were received last Wednesday, and we're still trying to get together on a good time for us to get up to Deltaville and get them installed. And if people would like to know, when we get to part 3, we'll give you a little update on how that's gone. Appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now and turn it back over to Joan.
Thank you very much for that, Lee and Danny. Very good description of your process and where you're at. And we will look forward to seeing in part 3 your testing and whatnot of the sail that's being built right now by Jerry. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jerry so he can share screen and take over from that part. I will be asking questions on some of the sails. And if you as participants would like to ask questions, just go to the little box that says Q&A, click on it and type in the question that you have, and we will answer that at the end. So Jerry.
All right. Thank you. My name is Jerry Latell. I am a sailmaker, have a loft in Deltaville. That's our main loft. And we have a satellite office in Hampton, Virginia. I guess I should tell you Deltaville is in Virginia for any of you who are not familiar with the tiny town of Deltaville. I've been doing this for about, boy, I lose count, since 1998, 23 years. So I've been at it for a while, and I've seen a lot over those years and a lot of changes in the sailmaking industry. And you know, and how things are done, and sort of how different outcomes have become, not how different, and the final product and outcome from a sailmaking exchange, you know, how different they could be. And I guess I'm not saying that very well, but let me click through a little bit here. Start my slides. You know, as Joan said, if you have any questions, go ahead and ask them in the chat, and then Joan will read them out to me. I do much better when I get some feedback and kind of know what other, you know, what questions you have as I'm going. As I said, I've been a sailmaker for a while. My loft is in Deltaville. The loft that I have was founded in 1976. That's before I started there. And it's been a number of different things, a number of different brands over the years. It started as a fully independent loft, and then the owner took it into one of the sailmaking groups, and then it moved to a different sailmaking group. And then when I took it over, I joined yet again another sailmaking group back in 2005. And then, you know, a year and a half ago, we left that group for a number of reasons and joined up with another sailmaking group. So it's the same loft doing a lot of the same things, but it's had a lot of different names. And I'll get into that more, why that matters. One of the cool things that we do that not many lofts at all do anymore is build large traditional sails. We've built, over the last 8 years, we've built a full set of sails for the Eagle. We built sails for the Jamestown ships, for the schooner Virginia. We just built a real traditional set of skipjack sails, finished those last week. So that's something we do. And then building sails at all is different in this day and age for a loft in the United States. Most lofts don't build their own sails anymore. And then as a loft, we work with a lot of blue water cruisers. A lot of cruisers come through the little town of Deltaville. We have a lot of people right now. We have spring. It's sort of a spring and fall right now because we have a lot of people that are going in the water for the summer season, and we have people that are coming out of the water, hauling their boats for the summer to go back in the fall for heading back south. Yeah, as I said, yes.
We have a question from Tori Salvia. Importance of measuring the boat rather than going with a computer database measurement. That's a big deal, especially if you're going to be trying to do something long distance with a sail loft. How do you handle that? That is a huge deal. And actually, that's coming up in the talk. That's something I was going to talk about. It's actually on the next slide. Do you mind if we hold the question till the next slide? Sure. Yeah, I kind of want to, and the talk that I'm giving tonight is really about the sail buying process, what you should be thinking about. And I wanted to start with this first slide with kind of an overview of the sailmaking industry. When I got into it 20-something years ago, most sails were being built in the United States for the U.S. market. And in the last 20 years, that's completely flipped. And, it's not all bad. Sails are less expensive now than they were 20 or 30 years ago. Most of them are better than they were. The cloth is better. The workmanship, because, most sailmakers are utilizing inexpensive labor. We can put more labor in a sail, meaning more handwork and more finish. The other thing that's happened is independent sailmakers are going away, and more sail lofts are part of groups. The biggest thing in sailmaking that changed, and it was changing, it had started 20 years ago when I got in, but computerized design and all the communication tools that we now have mean that we can work with lofts all over the world, or sail production facilities and other sailmakers and sail designers. We're all connected now, and if we're using the same design program, we're speaking the same language, and we can just the ability to move all of this around is a far cry from where we were back when I started. We were doing everything in one building. Centralized production is another part of that. And really what we have now is there's a secondary market there's a wholesale market for sails. I can go out and buy, Lee's sail, for instance. I could have that built in a half a dozen different places, and choose the place that's the best. The loft that built Lee's sail is in South Africa. And the guy that runs that loft used to work in the loft that built all of the OEM sails for the Leopards. He knows the boat inside and out. And so I could call that guy. I worked with him on the design of the sails, sent him the designs. He built the sails and shipped them to me, and we'll do a little bit of finish work, but he did most of it. And then we'll work with Lee on the back end as well. Back to us building sails, we actually build about 80% of our sails in-house. And I guess I'll get into that more later. But we do a combination of in-house production and outsourcing. So Lee shared with you his process as a consumer buying sails. This is when I'm looking at that process from the other side of the table. This is what I see. The process is, the beginning is, step one for me is discussing, what a sailor needs or wants.
and then narrowing things down and agreeing on a product, and then finally a price and handshake on that we're going to do the job. And that is the most important step in the whole process. Making sure you discuss everything, nail down all the options. You don't want to get to the back end of having sales built and wish that you had another reef or this general or a different size or the clue or in a different place. You want to decide all that up front. And that's part of step 2 as well, meeting with customers after we've decided and really talking through the details. Joan brought up measuring, or Sal brought up measuring the boat. I think that, I try to measure every single boat that we build a sail for, whether, even if it's a Catalina 30, then we've done 20 of those sails over the years. I still like to go out and measure the boat and confirm things because every single boat is a little bit different. You can measure, there are ways to buy sails where a sailmaker doesn't come and measure the boat, but it's not as good as getting somebody there measuring the boat. We can copy old sails. We can lay them out, measure them, carefully, assuming that they fit properly, and then go from that. Customers, you all can measure your own boat or measure your sails. But if a sailmaker comes on the boat, measures the boat, everything is on him or her. It's their responsibility to get it right, my responsibility. And so you could be much more comfortable as a consumer knowing that I measured the boat and I'm responsible start to finish with the process. Part B to measuring is not only is it good when I come out, but the customers that get the best outcome are there on the boat when I measure and are able to ask questions, discuss things at the same time. So if at all possible, if you're getting a new sail, get the sailmaker on board and be there with them to measure. The next step is the design. So once I measure a boat, I come back to the loft. We do the 2-dimensional design, which I will go through in a little while, but that's, figuring out the triangle, the amount of roach that we're going to put in the main, the basic 2-dimensional shape of the sail, then plugging in all the options, the reefs, the patches, batten pockets, all that sort of thing. And then using a 3-dimensional design that, we have, for a Leopard 42, I've got a really good 3-dimensional shape file that I can plug into that sail. I go over it, but the basic design, the basic 3D design is pretty well thought through, and I've got it basically sitting on the shelf here on my computer. And then the next step is building the sail. And this, as a guy who makes sails and actually really believes in the crafts, grew up in this business making sails. And as I said, we try and build as many sails as possible and still build at least 80% of our sails in our own loft in Deltaville. Where the sail is built is really not that critical these days. It's everything that happens around that, before and after. Who's designing the sail, who's measuring the boat. It matters where the loft is that builds the sail. I was talking to my buddy Dave, who used to be in the sailmaking business as well. And, we deal with lofts, and we've dealt with lofts over the years in South Africa and Sri Lanka and New Zealand and China. And culturally, some of these places are just, it's much more difficult to work with people, especially when there's a language barrier. Time zones make a difference. If the sail's built in South Africa, he's only 6 or 7 hours away, so I can talk to him daily. New Zealand is so far different in time that we were able to talk to those guys, but it's a little more difficult. A Chinese loft, we've worked with them in the past. There's a language barrier and a cultural barrier and an enormous time difference. So there's some of the things to think about, but a really good solid sail could be built in a lot of different places. After the sail is built, then the sail needs to be delivered Often these days, sails are just picked up and customers install them. But we also install a lot of sails and checks them. And then, you know, as Leroy pointed out and was concerned about when in his shopping, is the after support and warranty is critical. I've heard lots of horror stories about sailmakers that don't stand behind their products. We didn't have a strong written warranty because we give a verbal warranty, and I feel like we really stand behind our sails. We've replaced sails after years and years for different things. We haven't replaced a lot of sails, but we've had some issues, and we stand behind them. And I think most sailmakers do. But I now have a thorough written warranty that Lee helped inspire me to create. These are decision factors, I think, in choosing a sailmaker, and I guess I'm probably biased. As I said, it's almost like real estate: location, location, location. You want to work, if at all possible, you want to work with a local sailmaker, somebody that will come out to your boat, measure, will be there at the end of the process. If there's an issue, it's really nice to know that you can walk into that person's business and say there's an issue and hold them accountable if needed. If you buy a sail from one of these online outfits from wherever, you really don't have that ability. You're kind of on your own. From measuring at the beginning, it's on you. If you make a mistake measuring, you may or may not be able to have the outfit that produced the sail, take care of it for you. So location is critical. I think a local sailmaker, and if you're in Florida and there's a good local sailmaker there, I think you should use that sailmaker rather than using me here up in Deltaville. Capability and experience, that's a much harder one to figure out with a sailmaker or a sail. A lot of these guys you work with are salespeople. That you sort of have to do your due diligence on that. I've got my opinions on lots of people. We work with most of the sailmakers I know are really good people and do a good job. And then cost. I just wanted to bring up cost because it's a function of a lot of things. But if you boil it down, the materials and construction are a big part of the cost. The cloth you choose. And all the details. I mean, some of the things like on Lee's sail, we had to get some adapters. I had no idea how much they cost. I just said, yeah, of course, Lee will include them. And they ended up being really expensive. But that was on me because I said we would include them. Labor is the other big part of cost in a sail. And I didn't include it, but shipping can be as well. If you had, I can have a sail built in South Africa. Their labor is less expensive than mine. I can buy the materials for less because I'm closer to the cloth manufacturers. The shipping is less here. And then there's freight back out of someplace like South Africa. So, labor, freight, materials, and then the last thing is time. And a loft like mine, we are very seasonal. So this time of year, we are really busy, and I'm not as inclined to offer a discount on a sail or give a better price as I am in August when in the heat of the summer and things slow down, or in the fall when we're trying to line up work over the winter. And that sort of cycle is true of most sailmakers, on the East Coast. So time, materials, and labor are the big cost factors. And then when you're thinking of buying a product, a sail product, I think anything on a boat, safety is the very first thing that you should think about and should be the most important decision driver. And then performance and handling, how, as Lee mentioned, being able to use his mainsail with a single reef line. So we built that in. So that's a handling consideration that you want to figure that out beforehand. You don't want to get a brand new sail and decide you're going to change something on the boat that's going to cause the sail to need to be modified. Performance is a very relative term. If I had a nickel for every time somebody came in and said, I'm just a cruiser, I'm not a racer, meaning they didn't want to spend any money on their sails and they didn't really care about their sails, I'd have a lot of nickels. The performance for me, I mean, you know, if you're a race guy, performance means one thing. If you're a weekend cruiser, it's something else. You just need sails that are going to hold together and last a while and perform okay. If you're sailing across an ocean, performance means that the sail cannot break. You can't have failures. You can't have battens flying out. You can't have sails tearing. A sail needs to be able to put up with a lot of abuse if you get caught in a storm. Those are all performance characteristics. Longevity and maintenance, you know, the cloth that you decide to use makes a difference in how long the sail is going to last. And there are a lot of little details that make a difference in how much maintenance a sail is going to need. You know, one thing that comes to mind that I think everybody, and I'll mention it again, if you're having a sail built, a new Genoa built with a UV cover, it should absolutely be sewn with either Tenera or a different type of PTFE thread. Those threads are guaranteed to outlast this umbrella, so you never have to research the sun cover. That's one of the things we do. I mean, almost every day we have a sail out on our repair floor having the sun cover restitched. With the Tenera thread, you never have to stitch it again. So if you're sailing in remote areas, it's nice to know you don't have to worry about, you know, these maintenance items. And there are a lot of other little details that can make sails lower maintenance over time. And then the construction and options, you need to figure all of that out. And storage space, that's something that people don't think about. You know, we've had customers come in and they're all excited and they want to order a new spinnaker. They do it, they get it, they're excited, and then we deliver it in this, you know, spinnakers are fairly large in a bag, and they're like, what in the world am I going to do with this thing when I'm not using it? So, you know, auxiliary sails especially, you know, you need to figure out storage space. And I guess along the same lines, handling sails, you know, like you know, all the different handling systems around sails need to be part of the decision process. Anybody has questions, please slow me down. Just raise your hand and ask.
We've got a few questions.
Okay.
I've got one from Rob Davis, a second one, three from Rob Davis. Okay, the first one you may have answered, but for those of us with custom vessels where we can't just look up the specs on the existing sail, how difficult is it to order new sails if the sailmaker isn't local? I think you answered that. Difficult.
Well, there are two things you can do. The first is, we've all seen those letters, I, J, P, and E. Those are the basic rig dimensions. And that's what we use for pricing sails, because they're close enough on size that we can price sails from those dimensions. And then when it comes time to build the sail, you know, if you order a sail and you go ahead and get one, you can measure, if you're relatively handy, you can measure. Most of us, I've got a really detailed measurement form that we send, and all, you know, any sailmaker should have a form like that you can follow easily. But it's difficult. Yeah, if you've got a custom boat that the sailmaker can't go back, if it's not a Catalina 42 that we've done before, and we can go back and we compare it to the last one we did and see if something's wildly off. You know, on a custom boat, it's a little more risky.
Now, also, Rob asked, what's involved in creating a completely new sail for a vessel? And I think you're going to cover that in the next few slides.
I will.
And then, can a sail specifically designed for light winds have fairly significant impact on boat performance for a heavy displacement vessel, or does the displacement outweigh the capabilities of the sail?
we can build pretty lightweight sails for heavy displacement boats. I was going to cover off-wind sails next week when we talk a little bit more about rigs and all, auxiliary sails and that sort of thing. But for light air, you need light sails and big sails, and it depends on the boat. I mean, every boat is a little different. These modern boats, we've got a Jeanneau dealer in Deltaville, and we work with those boats a lot. They've almost all of them have in-mast furling mains, non-overlapping jibs. I mean, even up to 50 footers, they're waterway height rigs, so they're not very tall, so they're relatively under canvas. And they're lightish boats and easily driven, so upwind they do okay, but downwind they really suffer. And so those boats really need an auxiliary sail for downwind. And then, if you have a heavy displacement boat, even if it has reasonably sized sails, it may need more horsepower for downwind. So, that's something to really discuss. And as I said, one of the things I hope I stress a lot is that talking with somebody, with a sailmaker about all of this, about your specific needs is critical. Because you can't generalize about off-wind sails for everybody kind of thing. Hopefully that kind of answers that question.
Yes, it does. And I think it just says the next two in the series, we'll have more information. But why don't you continue and talk about the cloth and construction options?
Okay. In this day and age, there are a ton of cloth options and construction options. The bulk of the sails that we build are still, white woven polyester. We still use the term Dacron, although we haven't used Dacron fibers and sailcloth in probably more than 20 years now. Dacron was a fiber that DuPont developed specifically for sailcloth, and it was the fiber to use back in the day. But other fibers have taken its place. We still call white sails Dacron, but they're polyester is the fiber. So the correct thing is woven polyester. Woven sails are still, the bulk of what we build for cruising sailors. They're relatively inexpensive. They last a long time. They don't mildew. They perform well. There's a big range of polyester fibers and woven polyester cloth out there. You can buy cloth very inexpensively. That's sort of like an OEM grade cloth that they would put on some of these lower end new boats. That's pretty stretchy, up to very high end, woven polyester cloth. That's 3 or 4 times as expensive, but more than worth that difference in cloth, the difference in price. So again, that's another area to ask a lot of questions about the very specifics on the cloth. But generally, we sort of start with cross-cut cloth. You can see this sail on the left. The seams are here. They're perpendicular to the leech. We've seen cross-cut sails forever. That's still the standard is cross-cut. The sail in the middle here is a radial cut. Radial sails, you can use a woven polyester in a radial, a properly made warp-oriented radial cloth we can do in a radial cut. We could also do a cruising laminate, which is similar to a racing laminate, which is load-bearing fibers in the middle of a sandwich with mylar films, and then on the outside is what we call a taffeta, which is a loosely woven polyester, and all those layers are laminated together into really nice lightweight, low stretch cloth. And sort of that's kind of the next step up in performance. These laminate cloths don't last as long ultimately as a woven sail will. So their shape will probably stay around longer. They don't stretch as much, so the shape holds longer in a laminate cloth. But ultimately, a woven cloth will outlast a laminate cloth. And then the last sail here on the right is a, sort of a composite laminate sail. These, what we call string sails, are actually done, they can be done in several different ways, but the ones that we've always worked with, the different lofts, and the current, evolution loft that we work with in New Zealand, they lay down one side of this laminate sandwich, which is usually a taffeta with a film. And then they have a machine that runs up and down and lays all the load-bearing fibers on the sail in the predicted load pads. And then puts the other side of the sandwich on there and laminates the whole thing together. And interestingly, what they do is they laminate the whole thing, and then they come back and cut seams into it in order to shape it. And then, the North Sails has a process where they make, it's almost like a paper mache. They laminate strips of fibers together and make that's what their 3DI process is. And there's another sailmaker or two, there's one in Europe that does this very similar process. So basically, the world of sailmaking is woven in laminates, and then in the woven world, there are different grades of cloth. And then the two types of woven are either a cross-cut or a warp-oriented or radial cloth. And then in the laminate world, you can get rolled goods that I would get in my loft and cut out into panels and sew together. Or you have these sort of composite sails that are string sails or the 3DI type composite. So there are a lot of options. And as I said, for most sailors, what we end up with is cross-cut woven polyester.
Jerry, I see,
Yes.
as we're looking at those sails, I can see, well, I think they're battens that come across, and
Yes.
there's reef points. Could you
Right.
explain the difference of what we're looking at with the battens and the reef points in these three sails?
Yes, I should have mentioned that in this diagram. I mean, the reef points are here, they're patches. Every time, I mean, you may not even, a lot of people might not think about it. When you make sails for 23 years, all the construction details are just kind of second nature. In the corners of every sail, there's a buildup of cloth and strength, so that to take the loads coming out of the corner where it attaches to the boat. And so those are all outlined here with these like here and here, oops, different patches. So in a mainsail, we'll have reef patches. So we have the same buildup. We actually have at least as much buildup on the reefs, because if you think about it, you're using these sails reefed in more wind than you are when you're using the full sail. So you're putting just as much load or more load on a reef sail as a full sail. The other details that are on here, these batten pockets are drawn on. This sail on the left has full-length batten pockets, so going all the way from leech to luff. The middle sail has 5 battens. The top 2 are full, and then the bottom 3 are partial. And I think this sail on the right has got a lot going on, but these reddish lines are, again, 2 full plus 3 partial. That's kind of a racing layout. I'm a big fan of full battens. They do 2 things. One is they support the roach. So the roach is any area of a sail that's outside of a straight line on the leech. So if you drew a straight line on the sail from head to clew, there's sail area that's outside of that line. That all of that area is considered roach. And battens really help. Well, battens are there to support roach. Full-length battens support it really well. The other thing that full-length battens do that's even more important is any flogging load on the sail, a full-length batten dissipates into the mast rather than into the middle of the sail. These partial battens, if you flog this middle sail, you get stresses on the sail in the middle of the sail at the front end of these battens. Unlike the sail on the left, where the full battens take all the load. And anybody that's flogged, a partially battened sail, and a fully battened sail. Notice there's a big difference in the motion. So full-length battens help with longevity. Did I answer that?
Yes, it did. Thank you very much.
Sure. The next thing to think about is, mainsail on a mainsail would be the options that you want. A big thing, as we've already discussed, is the number of reefs and the depth of the reefs. If you're just sailing coastally, you're never going to leave the Chesapeake Bay. One or two reefs is plenty, and they can be kind of standard depth. If you're planning to sail across an ocean, your needs for reefs are very different. A lot of people these days are getting 3 reefs, with the 3rd reef being at a storm reef kind of height. And the standard rule of thumb, a storm reef is, or a storm sole or a storm reef is roughly 30% of the full sail. And then we were just talking about battens. You can have different numbers of battens. You can have different lengths. One of the big things that people definitely don't ask enough questions about are the batten closures. On what we do on most of our blue water sails, if we're able to match up to the mast configuration of the slides or the track, is we're using closed back end battens. So the leech end is completely closed, and the battens load from the front and are tensioned by the car at the front end. So it's almost impossible to throw one of those battens as long as they're cut to the correct length. The next step from that, sort of down or sideways, is we build batten pockets with a laced end closure. So you lace the batten in here, tie it off, and it's almost impossible to lose one of those. And then for standard local, Chesapeake Bay kind of sailing sails, we'll still use the Velcro batten stuffer, which is simple and easy, and but not ultimately as secure as the other two I just mentioned. And there are other options out there, so it's important to think through the batten closures on anytime you're going to get a sail. Roach is a consideration. Racers want all the roach they can get, even if it goes past the backstay and you have to deal with the sail hanging up. If your boat tends to have weather helm, you may want to think about throttling the roach back a little bit. And we also can cut the sail a little differently, design the shape it a little differently, make the exit a little flatter, or even the whole sail a little flatter to help reduce the power in the main, especially the back end of the main, to reduce weather helm. Clue height is a big deal. Oops, keep doing this. Most of us now have Dodgers, Biminis, different, lots of canvas on the modern boats to keep the sun off of us. And we've got to make sure that the boom is cut to the correct height to clear everything. I mean, any sailmaker that comes out and measures your boat will do that, or should do that. But one thing you need to be sure of is that if your bimini's not on your boat, that you tell the sailmaker, or that the ideal situation is the bimini is on the boat and in place for the sailmaker to measure and make sure that he's going to miss that. And then there are lots of details, logos. If you want the logo of your boat, that's not an automatic, but it's something we can all do. If you wanted a sail number, telltales are automatic. Draft stripes, we almost never put draft stripes on cruising sails, but you can get them if you want them. If you're an old racer, former racer, and you want draft stripes to see the shape of the sails, just ask and it can be done. And then on a mainsail, a really important thing that we're doing, we do it on almost all blue water sails, is an overhead leech line. And if you're not familiar with that, what it is the leech line goes, let's go back. The leech line is, it dead ends on the clue, goes up the leech, over a couple of little blocks at the head, and then comes down the luff, and it's adjusted at the tack, at the tack, and then at each reef tack. And what that does for you is you don't have to, you're on a reach and the boom's out, you don't have to go reaching out the back of the klug to try and adjust your leech line. You can go right up to the mast and do it. It's much safer. I think that's it on mainsails. And here's a picture. This is actually a lagoon 42 or leopard 42 rather. Sorry. And you can see here's the boat. I just grabbed pictures offline. So these aren't our sails. These are just random sails from online. But it matches the design that we recently did. If you look at the clue height on the Genoa, it's made to hit the track. Here's the Genoa track. We're designing this thing, the two-dimensional design. We make it, put the clue in the spot where it needs to be in order to sheet properly. You can see the clue on the mainsail. The boom has is angled up a bit, but you can see why if you look at the boat over here. If we cut this, if we just randomly cut this main to the IJP and E and cut it with a 90-degree tack, it obviously wouldn't work with that hard top. It'd be quite a mess. And then the reef heights, you can see that this is a blue water type sail with a deep storm size third reef. All the reefs are spread a little bit more than standard, and this third reef is pretty darn deep. Any questions, just shoot them out there. Genoas, your Genoa options, the size of the Genoa, we're always talking to people about Genoa size. People almost never know exactly what they think they know, but it's people are wrong. This isn't a condemnation of anybody, but people think they have a 135 Genoa, but it's almost always bigger or smaller than that, or they think they have a 150. So measuring the actual, if you really like your old sail, it's worth getting it out and measuring it to see exactly what you have as a good starting point. And then deciding on the size of a Genoa. I don't like the great big Genoas that are hard to tack and dragging around the rigging. I much prefer, I don't think it's because I'm lazy either. I think I just like it to be a little easier. A smaller Genoa, anytime I can go smaller, on my own boats I do, and I encourage customers to tend smaller as well. Of course, if the customer tells me he's only going to sail on Chesapeake Bay from Memorial Day to Labor Day, then we want to think about a bigger sail. The other times are if you've got a boat, especially the early in-mast furling boats, the designers didn't really design them for those in-mast furling mainsail sizes. So, a bigger Genoa often is needed to make up for the loss of mainsail size. UV cover colors. We've had people change them midstream, and it's a pain. You want to nail that down, of course. And then I mentioned already, I want to mention again, the Tenera or PTFE thread on the UV cover. If you're a serious cruiser, it's almost like you have to have that stuff. It's a major, major difference. And then a foam or rope luff. And everybody hopefully is familiar with that. What we do is we sew a crescent-shaped piece of foam right behind the luff tape on the Genoa. Let me click on the next slide here. It would be right up here in the Genoa, right behind the luff. And what that does, and it can be a piece of foam, or what we do is we sew a sleeve on here and put polypropylene rope in there. And the rope or foam, their job is to be bulky. So when the sail rolls up, it creates a larger roll in the middle of the sail and pulls some of the sail shape out of the sail. And actually, if done properly, the sail should actually become a little flatter as you roll it up, which is exactly what you want when you reef a Genoa. You want it to flatten out a little bit for the higher winds, smaller and flatter. If you've ever furled a sail or reefed a sail without a foam luff, it's a pretty messy shape. So foam or rope luff is critical. I mean, we almost never build cruising generals of any size without, one of those devices in them. So moving on, I think we're getting close on time here. This is a Sabre 42. These are the same, this is just another random shot. That's actually, I think that's a north sail. I shouldn't use that picture. But they're very similar sails. These are sails that we built for another Sabre 42. It's actually a 426. And everything on here, I won't go into all the details, but clue height, this is a racing sail, but we were using it, it's our offshore racing sail, so we do a lot of reaching. So I designed the clue up higher to clear the lifelines, so as we ease that sail, it doesn't flop over the lifelines, it's already up there, we get a good lead on the outboard leads. It's just there's just a lot of little details that you want to talk through. The reefs are not super deep in this main because it's actually the north main over here. The picture has deeper reefs than what I designed on this sail. But we just knew we weren't going to be going out and things when we needed a really deep third reef. So, any questions on all that?
Yes, I've got one question again, and this is on in-mast furling. But he doesn't, this is Rob Davis again. His boat has in-mast furling, but not the standard slot type system. I get probably an older system. Our masts have an open rear face and use a pro-furl continuous line reefing system. For these type of sails, are the options severely limited compared to a traditional system?
You should have all the same options. I mean, rigging and tuning that system can be tricky. Most of these in-mast furling systems, they don't rely on a lot of luff tension, or I should say, tension on the system themselves, because when they can only move so far, they come back and they hit the back of the mast, and that's as far as they move. And we actually designed the sails to essentially have the foil fall back against the mast and follow the mast up. And if the system is not, doesn't have that limit on it, if it can sag, they're boats with furling systems that are completely behind the mast. And so the luff, it's basically just the luff that has to be designed. You got to figure out as a sailmaker how much the luff of the sail or how much that system is going to sag, and match the luff of the sail to that. If you cut a completely straight luff and made it up to a system that bows out from the mast 8 inches or a foot, then the sail shape is not going to be great. But if you predict that deflection of the system and cut the luff of the sail and match it, you can get a pretty nice sail. And you can use, I don't think that the materials are gonna, you could use any materials that you would otherwise use on an in-mast main. I assume you have a sun cover all the way up the back edge. That would definitely be something I would put on that sail. Which also reminds me, that's a real weak point in mast furling mains. We can actually tell people that dock their boat with the bow facing north by the amount of sun damage on the leach of their in-mast mainsail. If you think about it, if you dock your boat with the bow facing north, every day the sun is passing by and shining through the little slot in the back of the sail, at the back of the mast, and eating up the sail. And we can see that in the loft when we lay sails out. Obviously, if you have a completely open back of the mast, you've got to have a sun cover all the way up that. Does that answer the question?
I think it does. I don't see a reply back, and I don't see any chats.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it does.
All right. If we have any more questions, throw them out there. I was just going to summarize. It's hugely important to discuss all the details up front. almost, any kind of unhappy customer, not any, but when I've had, and I don't have very many unhappy customers, but the ones that end up not as perfectly happy as others, almost always it's a communication error. And I think that's true in, in humans in general. I know it is at my house with my wife that it is usually my fault. But most of the times when there's frustration, it's a communication thing. So, and it's amazing to me how many people call or email and order sales, and there's almost no discussion. And I think, we make most of them happy because most of them aren't doing blue water sailing and as sophisticated sailing as I think a lot of you are. But there's a real missed opportunity to spend some time and ask questions and make sure the details are all correct. When buying a sail, somebody earlier today mentioned that they had a bad sail buying process. They bought a sail, didn't know where it was going to be made. It ended up being made in China, which, as I said earlier, there are lots and lots of really nice sails that have been built in China. So it has nothing to do with that. But, it came as a surprise that it was built there. There were communication errors, and the sail had too much roach and hit the backstay. So the sailmaker recut the roach on the sail, and the customer was never happy with it. Part of, I told you I'd pull the curtain back. I think I have a bit. One thing that I do, if a customer buys a sail, we don't really discuss where it's going to be built unless somebody asks. And we're more than happy and open and honest about where it would be built. But I like to keep the option open because I want to keep my loft busy. But if it gets too busy, I like to have the option to have the sail done somewhere else. But customers who ask the question, the direct question, I tell them, and we lock in a place where the sail is going to be built. And I think that you should ask that question. And I think you should ask who's going to measure the boat, who's going to do the design work on the sail too, because it can be lots of different people. A sail making project can bounce around to a half a dozen different people during the process. One guy, you can talk to a salesman who has somebody else kind of measure the boat, who sends those measurements to a third person, a sail design guy somewhere in the world. And then the design goes off to someplace to be built. And then the sail comes back and somebody, hopefully either the guy that measured the boat or the guy that sold you the sail, gets the sail, checks it, and then brings it out and puts it on the boat. It's important to know who all those people are and what the process is. So I would it leads me to the next thing, ask lots of questions. Next week, I want to talk about, touch on a little bit modern rigs, rigging options, and sails, and particular auxiliary sails. I want off-wind sails. There's so many options these days that I really want to cover some of that, and which off-wind sails make sense for which boats. I mean, we've all heard now about asymmetric spinnakers, genakers, which are the same thing, code zeros and cruising code zeros, and all sorts of other names for sails. There's just a spectrum of these off-wind sails. So I want to cover some of that as well. So anyway, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them, or we can wrap it up and move on.
I don't see any more questions. I know that we had a couple comments from Tori. Fabric options, cost versus benefit for maintaining shape over time, and then bending on new sails and going for a test sail. I think you're going to cover that next time with the new sails and going for a test sail. And I know for sure you're going to do it in the session 3. The one comment, pending on new sales or going for a test sale, with the understanding the sailmaker will fix if something is wrong, they will fix it, which would be a nice thing to know, but that's part of a warranty process. If there's something wrong with the sail, should be corrected to satisfaction. But
Well, that comes back to the, you know, using as local a sailmaker as you can use. You know, if somebody in the Chesapeake Bay has a problem with the sail, or even further, you know, and it's one of our sails, I will go look at the sail and figure out what's going on with it. And you want to, but if I didn't, I would expect the customer to walk in and hold me accountable and demand that I do. And that's a whole lot easier to do if I'm local. Not every new sail gets a, gets a test sail with a sailmaker. You know, as I mentioned, time, you know, the person's time and is a big deal. This time of year, we're busy. The price of the sail, if we give somebody a big discount, you know, maybe it's kind of understood that they're going to install the sail themselves. But if you ask, usually pretty much any sailmaker should come and get on the boat and look at the sail. And, you know, certainly if there's an issue, they should be there to fix it.
well, thank you very much, Jerry. This has been really informative. I've already seen 4 different things that we did wrong with our last sail purchase. Yeah, and I've got 35,000 cruising miles.
Wow.
So, and offshore and in some pretty bad weather. It is safety with these sails. So thank you very much. We'll look forward to talking to you next Wednesday. And on your next presentation, which will be on the rigging and the more in depth on some of the sail issues. Does anyone else have any questions? Lee, I want to thank Lee and Danny for their wonderful start for this program, because he described what he's doing. And we will be talking with them next week. And then again, for the 3rd series, when we see how his sail works, hopefully, if the weather supports it or not, we'll see how that works. If maybe. And then I see Tori Salvia is here. He's muted, but Tori is actually an excellent support and friend for us all cruising. He's a professional film producer, and he has been giving us a lot of guidance on some of the efforts we're trying to do. He actually has Sail Flicks, and there's quite a few sailing videos that he has on his program. But thank you for joining us, Tori. And thank you, Jerry, and we'll see you next week. And Lee, thank you very much. And for everyone who attended, thank you very much. Good night.
Thanks.
Good night. Thanks.